Hello again, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of Up Late with Ben Northey, where we have the chance to meet and discover more about the lives and journeys of the people who go to make up this wonderful MSO family of ours. And as always, and particularly this week, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the home of the MSO, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So last week, for those who watched, we met cellist Rowan DeCourt, who was another wonderful and very inspiring speaker. And it's been so good to have the chance to meet the people and the personalities behind the music making of the MSO. Thanks also to you for your questions and all of the messages that we got about last week's chat, which was fantastic. You may have noticed I'm in a different place now. Those of you who've been following my travels around the kind of southern part of the globe. I've been over in New Zealand for 4 weeks, and on Saturday night I conducted the last of my concerts with the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra in that 2-week period that I was there. A wonderful American program that seemed to miraculously coincide with the American election week. And on Sunday morning, I got up at 4:30 a.m., which is 2:30 a.m. here in Australia, and took 3 flights back to Melbourne. So Christchurch to Auckland, Auckland to Sydney, and Sydney to Melbourne. And now I'm back at home and very, very glad to be here and looking forward to seeing the musicians of a different orchestra, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, in the coming weeks as we start to get back to doing some work together. And gee, I know everybody's looking forward to that. So stay tuned for some information about upcoming concerts with Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. So I mentioned that the acknowledgement of country is particularly meaningful and relevant this week as NAIDOC Week celebrations are being held across Australia. And NAIDOC Week gives us all the chance to celebrate the culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, NAIDOC Week, for those of you who don't know much about it, is normally held in July, but this week it's been pushed back to November due to the pandemic. But it's a week that's celebrated not only in Indigenous communities, but by Australians from all walks of life. And the week is a great opportunity to participate in a range of activities and to support your local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. And this year's theme for NAIDOC Week is Always Was, Always Will Be. And it recognises that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were Australia's first explorers, our first navigators, our first engineers, first farmers, first botanists, first scientists, first diplomats, first astronomers, and first artists. And you can check out the NAIDOC Week 2020 website for more information and to find out what activities are happening in your area, and that acronym NAIDOC. And what a great chance to shine a light on the achievements of the many talented and creative First Nations musicians who constantly enrich our artistic life and inspire us to a deeper understanding and connection with Indigenous culture as we continue our reconciliation journey as a nation together. So in our 2021 season, for those of you who've had a look, you can see that MSO is proud to be featuring First Nations artists, including the magnificent Deborah Cheetham, one of my all-time favourite people, whose large-scale war requiem for peace, Umarella, was a high point of last year's season. We also have songmen Daniel and David Wilford joining us as featured soloists, as well as violist and conductor Aaron Wyatt, who will feature a soloist in a new work by Deborah Cheetham titled Nanyubak, which means Dreaming the Future. So a wonderful year ahead. And that brings me to tonight's guest, who has been a frequent collaborator and colleague of the MSO, Jess Hitchcock. And her voice can be heard on the recordings of the MSO's Acknowledgement of Country, which she recorded in 9 Indigenous languages. That must have been a long recording session. I'll ask her about that. She's a multifaceted artist, an award-winning opera singer, a songwriter, solo performer. She's a regular performing partner with singers like Kate Miller-Heidke, who she collaborated with on The Rabbits for Opera Australia, wonderful opera that was presented by Opera Australia a few years back. We'll also find out about her more than 10 years as an integral part of Australia's only Indigenous opera company, Short Black Opera, and the extraordinary work Jess has done there as a teacher, composer, and artist. She's also just a fabulous person, as are all of the people on this show, all-round legendary human. Welcome to you, Jess Hitchcock.
Hi, Ben. Nice to be here. Thanks for having
It's
me.
so good to have you on Up Late with Ben Northey. I'm just thrilled that you were able to do it because I can imagine this is a busy week for you, right? I mean, I know that you were on ABC TV last night, for example, with Archie Roach. I mean, just tell us a bit about that. What was the show you were on last night?
I was on The Sound in the evening, and actually in the morning I was on ABC Classic FM with Alice Keith on Weekend Breakfast, just playing some of my favorite music and talking about all things me, I guess. And yeah,
Yeah.
I sung an amazing and beautiful duet with Archie Roach last night on The Sound, amongst other incredible Indigenous artists who were also on that show. And yeah, this week is NAIDOC week is always busy, and this year it just happens to fall in November instead of July. And so I'm really looking forward to, getting back into the swing of things essentially this year.
Oh, Archie's just one of my all-time favorite performers. I have so much admiration for him. That must have been extraordinary. And yeah, I imagine it's a really big week. You're doing some talks and things like that as well. You were mentioning you've got a
Yeah,
lot on.
I also, I work as a performer, but this week in particular, NAIDOC week is also about education, and
Yeah.
it's about, talking about, for me, Torres Strait Islander culture, as that's where I am from, and, also acknowledging Aboriginal culture and the importance it plays in Australia. And the broader community, everything comes from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people creating that foundation for Australia. And we've moved forward into acknowledging that now for 1 week of the year.
Yeah, I know that's true. Well, hopefully it's drawing attention to something that we can celebrate every week of the year as well, and certainly have as part of our identity as a modern Australia. My kids have been learning all about it at school, which they do every year, and you can see they've decorated my set here at home in my lounge room. They've got a couple of kids' books. We've got Dark Emu there, Bruce Pascoe's wonderful book. There's a wombat, this wonderful dot painting here by an artist called Lucky Morton that I've had for a few years now. It's one of my absolute favorites. So fully decked out, ready for this discussion. But I mentioned some of the collaborations that you've done with MSO. So tell us just a little bit more about those, the first time you worked with the orchestra, and maybe some of the various projects that you've been a part of with us.
Yeah, sure. So my first connection with MSO was actually through Deborah Cheatham and her project Umaralla, which you mentioned before. And obviously I knew who the MSO was previously to that. And I was coordinating the Dungala Children's Choir, who are an integral part of Umaralla. They have Umaralla as a broader concept is a full orchestra, and then it has an Indigenous children's choir, and then a non-Indigenous what is it, SATB choir? What do you call that? is that right?
A full chorus, yeah, full choir, chorus. SATB choir. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So it's a lot of non-Indigenous people, but then the soloist, which was Deborah, and then the baritone soloists were also our Indigenous roles, and then the mezzo was a non-Indigenous role. So there's a lot of really great coming together on that project. And Dungala Children's Choir, who I'm the assistant director of,
they're my all-time favorite choir.
So they are so amazing. Incredible. I have missed them so much this year. Not being able to see them this year has been brutal. And so they're just an amazing group of children from Shepparton and from Geelong. They're our main groups of kids from Dungala Children's Choir, and they came together, and that's how I worked with the MSO. And then from that, the MSO sort of discovered that I was this human being, and they asked me to come and perform Deborah Cheatham's what does it do? Not her Dutala. What's her acknowledgement to country that she wrote for MSO? Sorry. Yeah. And I recorded that in 9 different Indigenous languages, which was a great initiative on behalf of the MSO.
And that's for all of the different areas that MSO visit and
that's right. And you guys do a regional tour in Victoria, and so now you guys are going to be able to bring that to them. And the language was gifted to the MSO, and so I got the privilege of recording that as an audio recording, and then also just recently as a film recording as part of NAIDOC Week and the gifting back process to the elders of those communities. So yeah, it was an amazing process, and to learn all those different languages, and each one of them is saying something different about their welcome to country, which I think is really important to learn those different translations. And
it's been incredible for us to work with people like yourself, like Deborah. And I feel like we've all been on a journey of enlightenment and education and understanding. And I'm really hoping that we can touch on a few of those kinds of themes in our discussion tonight as well, because I just feel like it's so important to continue to build understanding and respect for Indigenous culture. And so much of that just starts with these kinds of discussions, actually, and just hearing different perspectives on that. So we'll get to that. But I wanted to start by talking about your own musical beginnings, because was it always going to be music for you? Was this something that was very obvious from a young age that was it? How did it start?
Look, I want to say yes, but it wasn't always music for me. So my mother was an amazing educator, and she grew up in Papua New Guinea, and so she wanted all of her children to have this incredible education, and part of that was music. And so she was very diligent with our music education, and I'm so grateful to her for that. And I played the piano from a very young age. I think I was 2. I was in the Yamaha program in New South Wales. I grew up in Sydney, and so I did the Yamaha program.
It's amazing how many people started with the Yamaha programs, and I was exactly the same.
Yeah,
amazing.
I hope that it still exists. I mean, I haven't heard of it in a while, and I know that Suzuki was another another form of learning, but I did the Yamaha practice, and I was a very diligent pianist for a very, very long time, and practicing 5 or 6 hours a day, and I did all my AMB exams before I got to high school. And then I went to the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney, the high school there. And when I was in year 7, I decided that I would start playing the bassoon, and because I had played clarinet previously in band when I was in primary school.
I bet they were thrilled about that, having a bassoonist at the school. They're like, yes.
They were, actually.
Yeah, I bet.
They I remember them coming into the room and physically asking everybody, like, does anyone want to play bassoon? Like, obviously they didn't have any bassoonists in that year group. And I was just like, yeah, why not? It sounds like a good time. And so I picked up bassoon when I was in year 7. And through that, I got to play in many, many orchestras, which, as you would know, is an amazing experience and a separate experience from being a pianist and being a singer.
Well, I can imagine they were completely different. I mean, you sound like somebody who was doing a lot of hours in the practice room on piano, and probably not actually playing that much with other people. So it must have been terrific. Was Con High kind of the logical place to go to for a talented young musician in Sydney?
Yeah, it was that, or Newtown of Performing Arts High School. And my younger brother, who is now a dancer, actually went there. And that was a school that had all of the art forms in one school. So it had drama and theatre and dance.
It's fame. It's basically, you're too young to know what fame is probably, but I remember.
No, I know what fame is.
You know what fame is? Okay. Just making sure. I'm incredibly ancient now, getting there anyway. Fame.
It was a bit like fame, but the Con High was a lot more classical music focused, and at the time, that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a classical pianist. I wanted to be a concert pianist, and that was my goal that I had in sight for myself. And I had all the crazy Russian teachers, and did all of the the 8-hand pieces and the duets and things like that. And I really love piano, and that foundation really of classical music and of piano really set the bar high for me to move into what I'm doing now, which is...
It's amazing, the foundations that would have given you. And I think it's the same. I mean, I've got both of my kids learning the piano, and it gives you the building blocks of music, really, doesn't it? I mean, you've obviously taken it much more seriously than most kids of that age would. But it's just, it opens up so many possibilities in music, doesn't it? Which you've gone on to to absolutely take all of those opportunities. So I imagine that, I mean, you had to audition to get into Con High. That's a state school, right? And Newtown, I think, is also a state school in Sydney. It's a credit to those places that they've got such, but you have to audition to get in. You can't just walk in. Is that right?
Yeah, you do have to audition to get into those schools.
Yeah.
And I auditioned on piano, and I got into Newtown and into the Con. But I think the Con just so I had actually been going there. They have a Saturday program for primary school children. I can't remember what it was called, but I had been going there every Saturday doing lessons and doing ensemble work and chamber. You do a little bit of chamber music and stuff as well, which is an integral part of being a musician, is doing that chamber music and doing that ensemble work. And so it became a place that I was familiar with. And so it just seemed like the logical step for me to go to the Conservatorium High School. And, that was obviously a blessing in disguise, because that is where I met Deborah Cheatham, her daughter, Tamara Kohler.
Tamara, that's right.
Yeah, she's an amazing flautist. And
so she was in your year, was she?
She was in my year. She was one of my really close friends in my year. My two closest friends in high school were both flautists randomly. Stephanie Vici, who now plays in QSO, and Tamara Kohler, who runs Rubik's Collective. And they and Deborah was Tamara's stepmom, and so obviously I knew of her in that parental role, when you're younger and you're a teenage girl going through it all. And Tamara and I are really close friends to this day. And the Con High, I couldn't have asked for a better school. It was very small, only had 25 kids in my year, so that was nothing.
That's really interesting. And so you played bassoon all the way through. Obviously, you would have been very valuable to them, I'm sure, as a bassoonist. But the piano that sort of started to be moved onto the back burner a bit, didn't it? That must have been a big decision, because it seems like you got to year 9 and you sort of fell out of love a little bit with that. I mean, it's a very demanding, practice routine as a concert pianist. So how did that decision get made? And was that a difficult one to make?
I honestly think that it was just about becoming a teenager and finding different priorities. And I think that everybody goes through those phases. And, I'd been such a diligent student on the piano for myself, and because my mother was with me every single practice and sitting beside me in every lesson and, telling me what to do. And so I was doing it, and I'm so grateful for that. But, you get to 15, 16, and you just start wanting other things. And I didn't want to be in a room for 5 or 6 hours a day practicing every day. That's just not what I wanted. And I had the skills because I'd started so early. So I was really lucky in that sense that I had the ability that, and music has been something that always has come really naturally to me. And I've been really lucky in that sense that, I can pick up things really quickly, and I haven't had to work, I have worked obviously, but I haven't had to work that hard, especially at singing. I'm a professional singer now, and I can basically say that I've had, 5 or 6 singing lessons in my whole life.
Yes, so it's just a natural thing. That's
amazing. And that has come from the ability of reading music through piano and the pitch of piano, and then also through the lung capacity of learning a woodwind instrument.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And also your ears, developing your ears to the point where you know what sound you want to make. And that sounds like it's one of the most extraordinary things about your particular career is that versatility, the interchangeable nature of your vocal styles, the fact that you can move through so many different things, and why you make such an amazing artist and collaborator as well. But the journey to singing. So when did you even start to sing? I mean, seriously, when did that happen?
Yeah, so that was actually in about probably year 10. It's a funny story. I was actually walking with my friend Jess Lyons, who's an amazing clarinet teacher in Sydney, and we always listened to jazz on the way to school, on the train on the way to school. And I was listening to Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, a duet, and I started imitating Louis Armstrong with his growly voice. And I remember her turning to me and being like, wow, that's actually so good. And it was so funny because she was big Jess and I was little Jess, and she's like, little Jess, that sounds so good. And I was like, yeah, maybe I could be a singer. And so then my first 4 years of my career, I was a jazz singer. So I did the School Spectacular in Sydney, which is sort of like Southern Stars down here. It's a big.
Oh no, I've seen that on, because that's on TV, isn't it?
It is on TV.
And one of my very old friends, Steve Williams, was the music director, I think, of that. You remember Steve?
He was the head of the arts unit back then.
Yes,
and
good old Steve.
I'm sure he still has a major role in that position. He was amazing. Him and his wife were they were amazing people. She was into the choir more so than the band.
Yep.
And I got to sing with the big band, and I did a lot of backing vocals then, and
yes.
And then I did the talent development project with Mary Lopez, and that sort of just launched me into doing singing as a career, and jazz singing at that stage, and sort of cabaret singing.
So you started working professionally, I'm assuming. I mean, you're out of school now. You're sort of early 20s, 2021. You were doing gigs, right? Is that what happened?
Even before then, like 18, 19. So I was in that weird age group where I finished school at 17, and so 18, 19, I was working a lot of corporate work, a lot of corporate gigs, a lot of sitting down doing dinners and having to sing with people, and that was an interesting experience. And I know that we've talked about this before, Ben, that you've had that experience.
That's right. In my early 20s, that's how I paid my way through uni. It was exactly that.
Yeah.
And so you were a bit jaded by this, though, weren't you? You were kind of like, I'm not sure this is for me.
It was. I didn't enjoy it all that much. And then at the same time, I was studying a degree in anthropology at Sydney University, which I loved. And I finished that degree, and when I left high school, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do music. I've been doing it for such a long time. Like, is this really what I want to do? And so I went and got a degree in anthropology, and I was minoring in archaeology, and I was still doing a little bit of music here and there. And then I kept having to take semesters off to go and do musical things, such as, which I'm sure we'll talk about momentarily, Pecan Summer with Deborah Cheetham. And so I was like, maybe music is what I'm supposed to do. So I had a little break in there for like 2 or 3 years. And then when I turned about, I think it was like 23 or 22, I was like, I need to dedicate my life to music and see if this is actually a career, because, at that time in your life, you're sort of like, how do I make money from this? Like, is this a working career that I can do? And, I grew up in Sydney, and, all of my family are teachers and engineers and firemen and all sorts of things. And so I was like, how do I make a life for myself as a musician? And I think that's a question people still ask themselves.
Yes, I believe that comes up quite often when people are looking at a career in music. For those of you who've just joined us, I'm talking with Jess Hitchcock. And you can ask Jess questions of your own by putting them into the chat window on Facebook and on YouTube. And we're at the point in time where Jess has decided, after an amazing, it's kind of an incredible already 23 or 24 years, to actually give music a proper go. I mean, that's what's happened now, isn't it? You've done your kind of studies of other things, but music is keeping on calling. And I'm conscious of this relationship with Deborah Cheetham, because clearly you're kind of a you're in the family. You're mates with Tamara, and Deb's the mother of your friend, but you must have always known what she did, being an extraordinary soprano and composer and just a force of nature. Let's face it. So tell me about the next step, after you've made this decision that you do want to try and have a career in music. What then happened, and how did you start collaborating with Deborah?
Yeah, so firstly, I moved from Sydney to Melbourne, which was the biggest change. And Melbourne was the hub of music, and that's where everything was happening. And previous to that, I had been working on and off with Deborah, because she had also relocated to Melbourne at that time. And she was writing Pecan Summer when I think I must have been about 18. I think I must have been about 18. And
this is a significant opera for those people who've not seen Pecan Summer. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Pecan Summer. Yeah, so Pecan Summer is the first and only Indigenous opera in Australia currently. There's no other Indigenous operas in Australia at the moment, still to this day, 10 years later. And Deborah started writing this story about the walk-off from Cummergunja Mission, which is up in Shepparton. And essentially what happens is my character, young Alice, it's a stolen generation story, and it's also about this moment in time where the Aboriginal people in Cummergunja Mission were taking a stand against the mission manager, and they walked off their mission and crossed the border from New South Wales into Victoria, and they lived on the Shepparton Flats in protest of the way that they were being treated, which was a monumental moment in history. And within Pecan Summer there's also stories of my character in 2006, and her life and what she's witnessed, and then also in 2008 when the apology came from Kevin Rudd, and then there's flashbacks to 1939 when all of this stuff was happening, when the walk-off happened. And this story was such a special story to Deborah. She always wanted to tell it, and then she always had this unknown connection to it, and then she realized that her grandparents, because anyone who knows Deborah will know that she is part of the stolen generation, and her family are from Shepparton. Her family are Yorta Yorta and from Cummergunja Mission, in fact. And during this time that she was writing this story, she found out that her family were part of this walk-off. Amazing. And the elders in the community, her family were known to them. And so that's a really special connection that she made with that story. And she asked me to be part of the story, and as a Torres Strait Islander woman, and I was really stoked. And that was the first opera I was ever in, and honestly it was really the launch of my career into all the other things that have eventuated into what. And
I was conscious that toured, didn't it? That went to all of or a number of the states and ended up in Sydney. Where you were spotted, weren't you, by Opera Australia? They came and saw you because it was at the Opera House. Right?
Yes, that's right. So we performed in 2017, the Opera House. So the first performance was in 2010, and we did Melbourne and Perth and Adelaide, I want to say, and then we also did Sydney Opera House, which was always the goal to get there, and we did that in 2017. And it's a massive feat for Short Black Opera, which is the company that put it on, and Deborah's company, and we bring together Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander singers from all over the country, and we bring them together. And we did the Sydney Opera House in 2017, and I was spotted before that in Melbourne by Opera Australia, who were currently in the process of putting together The Rabbits, which you mentioned, which was an Opera Australia and Barking Gecko production.
That's right, and that was written by Kate Miller-Heidke and Keir Nuttall, is that right? And Ian Grandage, I think, helped with that too.
Ian Grandage and Kate Miller-Heidke, and Lally Katz was the librettist on that.
And that was an Opera Australia production. And so they invited you to audition for that, which must have been a big event, in your life as well. And you clearly crushed the audition, and you're all of a sudden, and that's where you first met Kate Miller-Heidke, the wonderful Australian singer and songwriter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's where I met Kate, and she was obviously writing that project, and I think that was her first opera music theatre project that she had been writing. She's done many since then, and I remember auditioning for her in Sydney, and from that project was a really interesting project. The story was based on the John Marsden Shauntan picture book about the rabbits, which is essentially a story of colonization.
Introduced species and the impact on the native Australian wildlife. Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, Shauntan and John Marsden do say that it's not particularly about Australia, but it does have those Australian roots. And so so I sung with Kate in that show, and a funny story about that is actually we did the first season in Melbourne, I think, and in Perth, and then after that Kate was like, wow, Jess is a really good singer, and so she ended up rewriting the show so that I had my own aria in it, which was amazing. So the rest of the tour ended up having this extra song in the whole show, and
love it. You know, Mozart used to do that too. They change all the time. It's like, we've got a great singer, we need to write an aria for them for this next run of the opera. You know, I mean, it's just so opera, that story. I love it.
Awesome, because that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't realize that was a thing. So I was very excited, and I had been singing some harmonies with Kate within that song, and our voices just really matched. And from that, she asked me to be her backing vocalist on her tour that she was doing. And then ever since then, I've just been working with her. Like, anytime she does a gig, I'll be there doing her backing vocal gig. I'll be there doing her backing vocals. And, I got to go to Eurovision, which I'm sure we'll talk about because it was awesome.
Oh, we have to talk about that. Yeah. So just if I can just get in my head, are you based in Melbourne when all of this is happening? Because I mean, that must have been a big move for you. You'd only lived in Sydney, I'm guessing, and then all of a sudden you're doing all of this stuff. But you've moved to Melbourne. Had you already moved to Melbourne by then? By the time you're doing the Rabbits?
I moved to Melbourne just after the Rabbits finished touring.
Okay.
And so I've actually only been here for 4.5 years.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of stuff has happened in that time, and a lot of that has been, from Pecan Summer and then Opera Australia. And I'm a massive believer in do one gig really well, and that will launch you into the next thing. And that, and I've lived by that, and essentially it has worked for me. So that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
But I put a lot of energy and passion into everything that I do, and that has really paid off for me. And I've, working with Kate has obviously been a massive highlight, and that has led me to work with other people like Paul Kelly and, you know, and even Archie Roach and, and going to Eurovision. And
I know, I can't imagine what that must have been like going to Israel. When was that? Was that like late last year?
May.
May? Is it that long ago? Gee, it doesn't feel like that long ago.
May 2019 we moved.
Amazing.
We went over there for a couple of weeks.
And the amazing the big poles and the swaying around and
I thankfully did not have to get up on the poles.
That looked pretty dangerous.
I also get horrible motion sickness, and so I could imagine singing and vomiting at the same time. It was a real concern. But no, I actually got to go over there, and because I'm the only backing vocalist that works with Kate, we actually had 2 Israeli backing vocalists that I went over there and I worked with and trained up and to sing with her. And so there was 3 of us in the end. And it was amazing time.
What's it like? I mean, is it just what it looks like? Because it just looks nuts. And there's all of these people partying in, sort of, it's a celebration of international music. And I mean, is it just exactly what you see on TV?
It is that and more. Like, I describe it as it's like this world of glitz and glam and like vibrancy and energy and like all of the best musical people that you can imagine from every country coming together at once. And, it's just like this world of craziness that pops up for 3 weeks somewhere and then just disintegrates. And then, the next year it pops up somewhere else. And obviously that didn't happen this year, but it's just this wild ride of a lot of, I don't know. It's a lot of glitter,
Yes, it does have a certain amount of glitter and very kind of specific Euro style. Like, it's very niche and kind of
a lot of ego
to process. There is. So, I mean, I'm conscious of also the fact that when you've come to Melbourne, moving on from your work with Kate, I wanted to touch on the fact that you were obviously still very connected with Deborah and her work at Short Black Opera, so Australia's only Indigenous opera company. And so how did that, because you've been working with them for 10 years. So when you got to Melbourne, how did that work manifest? Is it something you did full time, or how did you juggle all of these different things with tours and gigs of your own songwriting? How does that work?
Yeah, so Short Black Opera is this amazing company that I think just does it all. And when I first moved to Melbourne, I was working for them 1 day a week in an administrative capacity. And but also I was working on all their gigs and everything that they had. And now, jumping forward to 2020, I work for them 3 days a week in administrative capacity with Tony Tony Lalich, who is Deborah's partner, and then obviously Deborah Cheatham. So it's just us three who run.
It's the three of you who are basically running the show. Yeah,
that's right.
Amazing.
So, our motto is world domination proceeding.
Yeah, I'd say it's going very well, by the way.
Going very well.
As an outside observer.
Yeah, and so Short Black Opera is this incredible company that is the only music Indigenous company in Australia at the moment. There's Bangarra, who's dance, Ilbidri, who's theatre, and then there's Short Black Opera, who is music. And it is Short Black Opera, but it also is a music company. We do all sorts of stuff, and at the moment, we work with choirs and we work with singing, and Short Black Opera was born out of the lack of Indigenous singers that there were in Australia. And, Pecan Summer was an integral part of making Short Black Opera, but now it's so much more. And, our most recent project, Ensemble Dutala, and I think you mentioned with Aaron Wyatt, he's the musical director of that.
That's exciting.
Performing with MSO. So what an incredible person to have as the musical director of Ensemble Dutala, which is essentially, I'll be picking back up my bassoon and playing.
The bassoon is calling. Don't forget that's where you're going to end up, on the bassoon, Jess. I'm telling you, it's the future. The bassoon is the future for you.
Of my career, bassoon.
I love the bassoon.
Yeah, and that once again is, Short Black Opera has this amazing capacity to reach, not only like regional Victoria, but also national Australia, and then also international. We're this company run by 3 women, 2 of which are Indigenous, and we are essentially, dominating the world and bringing together classical musicians from all around Australia and really promoting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander music, and also, that exceptional level of music that really brings us on the playing field of every other company that's in Australia trying to
absolutely. Yeah, standing up on that level of excellence, I think, is so striking about Short Black Opera, and the fact that it's project driven. I mean, it was born through Pecan Summer. It was something that continues to evolve. I mean, Dungala Children's Choir were I guess born out of Pecan Summer as well. Is that right? Is that around that same time?
I guess so. Yeah, they were 10 years old, maybe not last year, but the year before. So yeah, they would have been sort of born out of Pecan Summer as well. And, they are, they were also born out of the Dungala Choral Connection songbook, which was a book of songs that Deborah and I wrote together over the last they were released 2 years ago, but they were written over 5 years, and they also incorporate 9 Indigenous languages from around Australia. And we would go and work with Indigenous kids in regional rural areas. I think from Western Australia, New South Wales and Victoria were the places that we had covered during that time. Obviously not everywhere. And we would write songs with the kids, and the language would be gifted to us in certain capacities. And yeah, that was an incredible project. But Dungala Children's Choir now consists of children from Shepparton and Geelong, and also occasionally from the other places that we visited, and we'll bring them together in Melbourne. And
I mean, I'm really interested in this series. We've spoken to a lot of different musicians about the role people, specific mentors, teachers, might be parents even, have played in their life. And I want to make sure we talk about you mainly, but I am interested in terms of your observations of what impact seeing someone like Deborah Cheatham working, and Tony for that matter as well, as a young woman, the transition in your relationship with her from, your friend's mum to suddenly professional colleague, partner, friend, I'm imagining as well. What's it like to watch her work? What do you gain from it?
Yeah, look, Deborah is a force of nature, like I think you said before. And yeah, it was interesting transitioning from that time of seeing her as, my friend's mum, who we would get in trouble off. And then now I work with her as a co-composer. That's a totally different relationship that I've managed to have with her. And also Tony Lalich, she is just such an incredible human being that is behind the scenes of everything that short black opera does. And Deborah and Tony, they're family to me. I call them my Melbourne mums. Yep. And they are just, as a partnership, they are just the most incredible force of nature. And Deborah herself, as an Indigenous woman in the industry, I think the best way I could describe it is that when I talk to other people that I work with Deborah, and that, like, you know, I think sometimes people forget that I know her so well, and they're like, oh, you know, Deborah cheated and did this and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yes, well, I can ask her about that, actually, because she's my family, essentially. Yeah. And people are always astounded that I know her so well, because she is this legendary human being that has just created this pathway for other Indigenous people, and especially women and young women in the music industry to, you know, she's paved the way for us, and she has done the hard yards on that. And, you know, and Tony Lalich has been there behind her, supporting her the entire time, well, for the last 10 years, because they have a beautiful, incredible relationship. And I aspire to have their relationship. They work so well together. And, you know, it's beautiful seeing them work every day together. And, you know, I'm just the third wheel in their relationship.
I'm sure you're much more than that. But it is wonderful to hear you talk about the impact that they have had on you, and just watching them just explore possibility, just making things happen. I mean, it's just incredible. And as somebody who's collaborated with both of them, I can say that it's not just confined to people who work directly with them like you do on a regular basis. Everybody who comes into contact with them is the same. So look, I'm conscious that there are so many questions coming in about all kinds of different things. Please keep those coming, because we'll get to those in a second. I think we should have a listen to some music, though, just to give you a break. You can have a sip of that lovely Tarawara wine. Thank you, Tarawara. What are we going to hear? What have you chosen for us, Jess, to have a listen to?
I have chosen Schumann's Arabesque, and I played it when I was in year 10 at the Conservatorium Music High School. And
beautiful piano.
I played it at a recital, and I had to do this big presentation on it. And I just love this piece, and it's been a piece that I've carried with me into my adulthood and always remembered how to play it. And it's got so many beautiful elements to it, and it's lots of different, they're not so much movements as different sections. And I really adore Schumann, and I adore all piano music as a pianist, but this piece particular, I spent a lot of time working on it.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's have a listen to the first of these excerpts from Schumann's Arabesque. Just beautiful, a performance by the pianist Jonathan Biss, and you can access a link to a full performance of that on YouTube. So Jess, does that do you miss it? I mean, does it take you back and you sort of think, oh, gee, I'd love to play that again? And you said you can still play it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can still play parts of it. I think I would need the music to look at the whole thing, but every time I listen to piano music, I wish that I had been more diligent and just kept going. And
this is like every single person who's ever learned piano and given up says the same thing. I wish I'd never given up piano. Why didn't my mum make me keep playing?
I know. And I have the gift of being able to sight read still, so I can pick it up again eventually. But
well, it leads us onto our questions because you've had a multifaceted career. A lot of people are fascinated by the fact that you've played so many instruments and styles of music. There's a couple of questions about the best entry point for young musicians. I mean, what would you suggest for young musicians, parents with children, as the best entry point?
I think the best entry point is piano, to be honest. Like, if that's what we're talking about, like that really first initial contact with music is through something like Yamaha program or Suzuki, because I do remember doing like rhythm classes, and then I remember playing piano. Piano is just this great foundation where you don't have to worry about pitch and you don't have to worry about sound. You
can sound good.
Yeah, you learn to read music more easily because you're just pressing a note and it happens. Like, you don't have to worry about breathing and all these other facets of life, essentially.
Yeah.
So, well, piano is amazing.
There's another question about the broad approach and how valuable that has been to you. I mean, you've already done so much, but is that something that you look at your own career and think that that's been a big part of why you've done well, is the fact that you have had this ability to shift between different styles, or at least not be defined by genre? Is that would that be true?
I have two answers about that. One is that the foundation of classical music training has prepared me to go into all of those other genres. And secondly, as going into all those other genres, I feel like the way forward for music and being in the music industry full time is to have that cross genre ability, because you can't just get stuck in one genre, because things change. And even opera today, Opera Australia is putting on musical theatre projects. Like, you have to be able to adapt to what audiences want to listen to, because the audience is the most important person in the room. And if they don't want to listen to you, then you don't have an art form anymore, really. As horrible as that sounds, but it's
no, I understand. And I mean, that's interesting about opera style of singing. I mean, we're talking essentially about a very different style than pop singing. And I guess the stuff that you're normally doing, even with Kate Miller-Heidke, who also is an operatic singer, do you have to shift to that level of opera singing when she flicks the switch and sort of goes into full diva mode?
Yeah, sometimes. Like, I do my on a technical level, my chest voice goes very, very high, which is like very don't do that. But it goes very high. Like, I can go up to a top G or something in a chest voice, possibly even higher. And so that has become a valuable asset for me, to be able to work with people who don't have that ability and, be able to support them in that way. And I love working with Kate because she does cross genre, and I'm able to use like that, that really full on chest voice, and then also like that really subtle, folk style, essentially.
Yeah, because I was asking you about what you write for your own material, and you said it's very much that folk style.
Yeah.
And, you're telling your own stories. How has there's another question here that's come in. How has your musical identity evolved over the years? What artists do you admire in popular culture, and have you incorporated some of those into your own work? That's an interesting question for people. That is your influences, I guess it's coming down to.
I have to say, still one of my biggest influences is as a singer is Ella Fitzgerald, and all the material that she sung. Like, I still really gravitate towards singing and and enjoying that sort of music. But then in terms of writing, I love country music. I love the essence of all the stories and everything that comes out in country music. And you know, I think that eventually, as my career, I'll probably end up writing a country pop album, which I think will be beautiful, because I love the storytelling that comes with that. And and I don't think anything, you know, other stories do capture, other genres do capture that, but they don't, they lose essence in that when they try to add other things to it. But country music really talks about the storyline. And
very honest.
I love Dolly Parton. I love her.
One of the greatest songwriters of all time, let alone singers. Yeah, just incredible. So there's another question about collaborations, and I suppose this is an area that I would really love to touch on before we finish, is collaborating with people who are, you know, not necessarily Indigenous background, the kind of culture clash that potentially is set up there, which is often, I think, so important, and the why of those collaborations is something that I'm fascinated by, and the things that you can learn from them. But from your perspective, you know, how does that work? I mean, have you sort of run into cultural insensitivities and ignorance? I'm sure you have. It's a rhetorical question, but what? Because I can't obviously, you know, have any perspective on that. But can you just tell us what that's like?
Sure. I think there's lots of things to talk about in that, but I think the biggest thing is, you know, when you are collaborating with Indigenous artists and you're a non-Indigenous person, you know, there's a point where you need to step back and you need to be educated by the people that you're working with, the Indigenous people that you are working with. And, you know, there's all different sorts of scenarios, of course. But, you know, in my experience, it has been, you know, there's a time to just stop and listen and learn. And then there is a time to put your 2 cents in, essentially, and relate to that person, you know, because the Indigenous experience in Australia is a difficult one to relate to. Like, you know, there's been occasions where people have said things to me, and, you know, they might be in their you know, their older age, and they've said to me like, oh, I suddenly found out I was Indigenous, and they sort of want to relate to you. But, you know, how can you relate to someone that's in their 70s who hasn't experienced the harshness of growing up as an Indigenous person and having that as part of your identity for your whole life? And, you know, there's that place and time to put your you know, your opinion in, and then there's that place where you just stop and you go, wow, this is beautiful, and just listen and learn. You know, education is the biggest thing.
It's very interesting hearing you talk about that, and also the fact that it's a different kind of reverence for culture, isn't it, in Indigenous culture? And that, I think, is something that non-Indigenous people are slowly becoming perhaps more used to. But I think it's one thing I've noticed that it's different. The way that I shouldn't say you, the way that Indigenous people relate to their elders, for example, is very different than Western, you know, that Western experience. How have you kind of seen that difference? Am I right in saying that?
That's right. I, you know, as growing up, my mother was born in Papua New Guinea, and Aboriginal culture, Torres Strait Islander culture, and Papua New Guinea culture, and a lot of Islander cultures have this, you know, almost unspoken rule that your elders, they have this respect that that is earned, of course, because of wisdom and their age and stuff, but they, you know, that doesn't translate across into Western culture. And I know that we've talked about this before, Ben, and we like that. It just, to me, you know, there's this unspoken respect that I have, that I've always had for Deborah. And, you know, anytime I meet an Indigenous person who is older than me, they sort of automatically gain my respect in that way that they are older than me. And that doesn't translate across into Western culture, which I have found a lot. And, you know, I experienced that in high school, where people weren't respecting teachers and, you know, all sorts of things. And I think that, I think moving forward as a nation, you know, there's there's wisdom in people who are older, and the knowledge that they have you can learn from them. And especially in the music industry, I think that, you can learn you can learn anything from anyone. It actually doesn't matter what age, but obviously people who are older have that knowledge because they've been there longer and they've been doing it for longer.
And it's a matter of being open to it, I suppose, as well, isn't it? And we're all responsible for our own education. Like, ignorance is not really an excuse or an option anymore. We have to take charge of our own education. But you said something to me once before, which was very interesting, about the kind of unspoken things that are different perhaps in the experiences. And when you're in the presence of learning, or when you're open to being educated, it's kind of, as you say, knowing when to listen. But it's like being, you were saying, in a library or being in a church from a Western perspective. It's that kind of feeling when you're listening to somebody educate you or talk, or just being open to learning. Is that right?
Yeah, there's that unspoken respect or reverence, or like behavior, really, that you do when you go into a library. You stop and you take it down a notch, and you just be quiet and you listen, because you know that you're in a place where knowledge is present, essentially. And so the thousands of generations of knowledge have gone into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, and they are themselves libraries. Like, everything that they say and that they do is something that you can learn from. And like you said, Ben, like, the thing is that you have to be open to that education. Otherwise, it just completely goes over you. There's no excuse for not being educated anymore. We all have the internet. Like, you can Google anything, anytime. Like, you can know the answer to something in 1 second. But to learn that from somebody in person, face to face, is a totally different experience. And I think with learning Aboriginal culture and Torres Strait Islander culture, there is there's knowledge within spoken word, there's knowledge within song, there's knowledge within dance, there's knowledge within art. Like, those artistic they were never silent. Like, they're all one thing, and they they come together, and they all have their own piece of story and their own piece of knowledge that you can learn from. And like, Umarala is a perfect example, to bring it back to Deborah. She has incorporated language, the revival of Gunditj Mara language, and she's incorporated into Western music so that people can relate to that, and they understand that. But then she's also incorporated art. And I think the next step, and I think when we did it in Port Fairy, we had dance as well. I don't know if you remember that. We had 2 dancers on stage in Port Fairy, and
wow,
that was just the culmination of all of the art forms within one. And I really believe that is the way forward for music and art and everything within the world, in terms of moving forward within the artist practice.
Do you see yourself producing your own show one day, your own production, your own large scale composition on that?
Maybe. I mean, I think at this stage in my life, I'm still really loving to work with other people, and collaborating, and composing, and performing at the same time. I still really love performing. But I think one day I will eventually put all of those facets of my life all together and create some huge monstrosity of a work. I'm imagining Christmas carols in the Domain. No.
Yeah, right. Thinking big. No, but I mean, honestly, what would be your vision for yourself in what would you love to be able to look back on in a different time of your career?
I would love to be an international artist that people know, and that people know my music, really. Like, I'd love people to be covering my music, and I want to be an artist, and a Torres Strait Islander artist that's known all around the world. Like, I can't think of any other artists. Maybe Christine Anu is another Torres Strait Islander artist, but in my generation, I want to be that artist that people know as spreading knowledge and music and excellence in music. I think is a really big thing to take away from my life, is that I I love excellence in music, and I don't want to be given a free pass or anything like that. Like I want to be a musician, and I want to be an Indigenous musician, and like I bring that to everybody that I work with, and that's what I want to do. I want to be touring my music.
Yeah, I feel like you're on the right track, and I feel like even though you've done so much, it's still early days for Jess Hitchcock, and look out world. That's all I can say. It's been so great to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Jess.
Thanks so much, Ben.
It's my pleasure. And so, well, thank you for all your questions. That brings us to the end of another fascinating chat with one of the great artists in the MSO family. Thanks for watching tonight. I really mean this. A huge thank you to my guest, Jess Hitchcock, in a very, very big schedule that she's got in NAIDOC week to join us. This has been a real thrill to have the chance to speak with you, learn more about your journey. And as I said, it's one that I just think it's only just warming up now. So it's one to watch for sure. And I'm wishing you all the very best for the remainder of this year and a wonderful NAIDOC week as well. So next week, we get the chance to meet another member of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, another instrumentalist, our second from a traditionally male-dominated section of the orchestra, the brass section. And my guest will be the fabulous trumpet player, Rosie Turner. We'll hear about her beginnings playing the cornet in the Willoughby City Brass Band, through the Australian Youth Orchestra, her further studies at the famed Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. What a week Philadelphia's had, goodness me. Her work in Australia and Asia, and joining the MSO, where she's been a member of the trumpet section since 2017. So one of the newer members of the orchestra. Will be a great chance to have a chat with her. I hope you can join us next Monday night at the same time. Thank you again to Tarawara for your support of Up Late with Ben Northey for the Vino. Gee, it's good to get back to that again. I'd completely run out over in New Zealand. I don't know how that happened. Clearly, I didn't take enough. But people of Melbourne, enjoy your new freedoms. What a journey it's been to this extraordinary place that we find ourselves in, with 10 consecutive days of zero COVID cases. The envy of the world bodes well for the future of music and arts in 2021, and for the future of the beloved musicians of the MSO. As always, keep taking care of each other, stay positive, cheers, and go well.